Prayers.
Let us pray. Guide us, Lord, in all our doings with your gracious favor, further to your continual help. Then all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally by mercy attain everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let's continue to pray for God's protection over us during this hurricane season. Heavenly Father, we live in the shadow of powerful elements beyond our control. We ask that you stretch out your mighty hand to protect us, our families, our homes from the devastation of storms and hurricanes. Calm the storms that may threaten our shores. Ease the anxiety and fear in our hearts, and replace them with an abiding trust in your peace and mercy. Grant wisdom to our community leaders and courage to first responders who stand ready to help those in need. Watch over all who live in the path of the tempest. Keep us safe in your shelter, and help us to remain steadfast and supportive of one another. In your holy name, amen. Together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
Senate is in session. Before we commence our business, I've learned of the passing of the former Clerk of Parliament of many years back, probably 1970s, early 80s, Mr. Reynold Kelman. He's passed away, and we want us to rise for a moment of reverential silence in honor of his memory, life, work, and witness.
Messages from His Excellency the President. Announcement by Your Honour.
Minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, 1st of July 2026. Senator Collins.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 1st of July 2026 be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, 1st of July 2026 be deferred. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? And those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, those minutes are accordingly deferred. For no further announcements, let me recognise the presence of the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Ryan Strawn MP, who is with us in relation to the item on our agenda today. Welcome, Minister of Finance. Very, very happy to have you in the Honourable to the Senate. In terms of those members who will not be with us today, Senator Reid will be absent. Senator Slocum will give notice of late arrival, and Senator Sinclair will join us remotely during the course of the debate. He is overseas and wants to contribute to the debate. That's it for announcements.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate and move, or matters, request to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and move by a minister, introduction of bills, public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 2, sir. Order number 2 is on the order paper and standing in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate to move the second reading of the Protection of Depositors Bill 2026.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for your welcome to this honorable chamber this morning. Honorable Senators, this is indeed my first time in this chamber delivering a speech, but I think it is important that as we have made these changes, sir, to facilitate ministers going in both chambers, I think it is a progressive step, and I look forward to today's engagement. This particular bill on the order of paper, sir, is part of the financial architecture, sir, which we all hope will never ever have to be used. And in the context that we, sir, in this part of the region, we have seen failed institutions. And what we want to make sure is that ordinary Barbadians at all levels will have the safeguard in place to ensure that should an institution fail, that there is a system in place that provides almost immediate relief by way of insurance. Now, let me start by saying, sir, that the Barbados Deposit Insurance Corporation, BDIC, was formed through an act of parliament 20 years ago, 2006, and came into operation in 2007. At that time, sir, as is the case today, it only provided deposit insurance or protection, sir, for those who had bank accounts in the commercial banking sector. And therefore, through not just advocacy, but in relation to the fact that the growth in assets or deposits from the credit union movement has increased significantly these last 20 years, it is important to ensure that as we further strengthen the financial sector, that the coverage with respect to ordinary Barbadians is further enhanced. And I think it is important that for Barbadians to recognize that since this bill was first passed in 2006, we have since seen the formation of the Financial Services Commission, which covers the non-bank institutions in Barbados in 2014. And as you know, sir, as a younger man, sir, you know the days of trade confirmers and the distress that thousands of Barbadians experienced when that bank failed. And to the extent that this type of insurance had that been in place at that time, the fallout would not have been as serious as it was then. And therefore, we've put measures in place to ensure that whilst we have a method of surveillance between the central bank as well as the Financial Services Commission to monitor the interests of Barbadians, it is important that we know, in a sense, sir, further strengthen that support to ensure that within the context of the credit union movement, that those Barbadians, people in Marhill Street and along the way, sir, who have credit union accounts, that they too are protected in this legislation. And so what this bill is intended to do, sir, is to further support families in this country. Individuals who have small businesses who deposit their monies in credit unions for whatever reason that they choose to do. And it is interesting because as you and I both know, sir, persons who are members of credit unions own these institutions. And therefore, there's a unique ownership structure that this particular piece of legislation is intended, sir, to provide for thousands of Barbadians, over 200,000 of them, who are members of various credit unions across the country. And therefore, this bill today will, yes, repeal the entire act. It will preserve those orders in place with respect to the fund that has been built up for the coverage within the commercial banking sector. But it will usher in, sir, a new level of protection that will be provided for thousands of Barbadians across the country. And why is this important, sir? 20 odd years ago, 2007 more precisely, assets in the credit union movement was just $403 million. At the end of 2025, it was just short of $3 billion. So roughly in the last 20 years, sir, you've seen almost a seven-fold increase in assets and deposits of credit unions, to the point now where almost $1 in every $5 in circulation in the economy are in credit unions. And therefore, to the extent that we now need to ensure that the financial system, as we are strengthening it, sir, that this level of protection is there. We are coming here to respond to the very strong advocacy, sir, that the Credit Union League has placed on the government these last 8 years to ensure that we have this mechanism of protection in place for their members. And I think the extent to which it would allow for greater confidence in credit unions and allowing them through other reforms which we are undertaking to really have the credit unions, sir, immerse themselves more aggressively in the economy and to be able to ensure then that this wealth that has been generated over time certainly can be passed from one generation to the next by having them immersed fully into the economy. And so there are two specific credit unions that are particularly large. As a matter of fact, sir, I won't call the names, but we all know who they are. But one of them specifically, sir, is even larger than the smallest bank. And it is instructive, sir, that even in the structure, one of the credit unions owns a Part 3 institution, which is a deposit-taking institution, which is not a full bank. So you have a situation where you have a parent who is not protected, but it owns a child, which is part of the current system that's protected. And therefore, it is a bizarre circumstance, but the reality is that's the nature of how the licensing regime works within the financial sector. And therefore, we are here to ensure that we right-size the level of protection within the deposit-taking institutions in Barbados. And therefore, those two credit unions, sir, as we describe them as systemically important financial institutions. And you and I both know, sir, that anytime an institution fails in a country, the resolution is often, or let me put it this way, a quick resolution is often the thing that matters most when there's financial uncertainty. And therefore, within this legislation, we will be reforming the mechanism through which, should an institution fail, that the BDIC as constituted will now be able to deliver a faster resolution than that for which we saw in the last iteration in relation to CLECO, for example, sir, which took 10 years to be resolved. And the lack of resolution meant that thousands of Barbadians were pretty much in abeyance, sir. And therefore, within the context of what we had to do with our debt restructuring, we had to resolve that 10 years after the fact. And really and truly, sir, that is not a good system within which to be able to give confidence that your financial system is working. And this is part of the reason why, even with this specific iteration, and I'll go through some details a little later on what is the proposed resolution framework. But as I said at the very beginning, sir, most Barbadians don't know that BDIC exists. And the reason that they don't know that is because we've put in place a level of surveillance through the central bank, which is actually quite robust and vigorous in relation to the capital adequacy requirements to ensure that when banks lend, that the process through which they do that lending, nothing is ever risk-free, but it is the level of risk that you're taking vis-a-vis the deposits that you have and the capital that you have to absorb such losses. And whilst I know that some people might be a bit disturbed at the amount of information that a financial institution will have to ask you for today, there's good reason for that. If you are nicer, put our money in a financial institution, we want to know that that financial institution is lending that money responsibly. And I don't say that lightly because, as I said, things come with risk, and risk will materialize from time to time. But it is a mechanism through which the provisioning and the cost of capital that is important for financial institutions today in the 21st century, as the economy is becoming much more dynamic. People are earning a lot more money. They're placing these monies in financial institutions. And therefore, it is important that the regulators, in this case Central Bank and FFC, monitor to ensure that the boards and the management are doing the things that they're supposed to do, because as institutions get larger, sir, you would appreciate the exposure becomes larger. And therefore, if we are going to ensure that Barbados' economy continues to get stronger, the financial system must be there to support that growth. And in this instance, sir, should something happen, then there will be somebody at first slip, as we would say, sir, to ensure that ordinary people can be paid out. Now, this deposit insurance, sir, as introduced in 2007, only covers up to 25,000, sir, of your account balance. And therefore, within the context of deposit insurance globally, sir, typically they tend to aim for a 95% coverage of all accounts. So you will look at the threshold in relation to the balances that people will have in their accounts, and you price the insurance which the financial institutions contribute into, not the depositors themselves, the financial institutions, to ensure that you can aim for a minimum of a 95% coverage in relation to accounts. What that means, sir, is that if you happen to have $500,000 in your account, it means that you're only covered up to $25,000. If you have $19,000 in your account, sir, and should something happen, it means you will get $19,000 back because you're covered for $19,000 in relation to insurance. And therefore, over time, as you would expect, sir, with a growing economy, and as I said earlier, with the amount of assets growing in the credit union sector sevenfold over the course of the last 20 years, the $25,000 threshold, as it stands today, with this specific piece of legislation, will see roughly about 91% of the accounts, which we anticipate will be covered by the 25,000, will be automatically covered. Now, of course, sir, let me make it clear. The passage of the legislation and the implementation of this does not in of itself create the immediacy of the coverage. It takes time for the institutions to build the balances to ensure that you achieve the insurance level to cover that perspective. Typically, depending on how aggressive the financial institutions are, they usually will achieve that coverage within an 8 to 10 year period in relation to how they contribute into it to ensure that they have the mass to do it. I'm happy to say, sir, that in 2007, the government of Barbados at the time, to jumpstart the coverage, put in $1 million for the banks. This time, sir, as we look at the numbers, the government of Barbados is committed to depositing $1.7 million to cover the credit unions at the beginning to jumpstart that particular initiative, sir, to ensure that we are able to start the process once the credit unions they've all done the business cases, sir, to ensure that they know what they need to do to provide that coverage for their members. They have been very vociferous, sir, in their advocacy in relation to getting this matter completed. And I think that as we go through these next few years, credit unions will get stronger. They will be able to provide better services for their members. As you can see, sir, even with the launch of BIMPAIR recently, 2 of the larger credit unions are already on board, and the league is working with the others to ensure that they too can come on stream as quickly as possible. And therefore, the league itself has been very proactive in leading this charge in relation to the change management within the credit unions. And you have seen some consolidation within the sector, such that you are seeing now about 22 more active and vibrant credit unions. There are ongoing talks within the league and the sector for more consolidation. And I think it is important for Barbadians to appreciate that in this digital world and with the types of product offerings that will be contemplated down the road, the bigger your balance sheet is, sir, it means that you can provide better services to your client class without abandoning the original mandate of the specific institutions when they were originally formed. And therefore, we see this as important, sir, for unleashing those assets for the credit unions to play a much more inclusive role in not just the recovery, but the transformation initiatives, sir, that are contemplated under BERT, sir. And therefore, this will, in of itself, attract certainly more investor confidence on the part of credit unions and their ability, sir, to be able to engage in helping to build out the economy. And so the $25,000, sir, and regrettably, I will say this to you that as it stands now, within the banking sector, the level is roughly 88% in terms of coverage at $25,000. So we will be reviewing that over the course of the next few years to ensure then that the premiums associated on the banking side can be adjusted. Now let me say, sir, that part of the requirements for credit unions based on the current legislation is that credit unions are required to hold accounts with banks, sir. So imagine you have a credit union, sir, one of the largest credit unions in Barbados. You're required to hold an account with the bank. And even though you may have assets in excess, sir, of $1 billion right now, because you're required to hold an account with a single bank now. So you have a balance sheet well over $1 billion, sir. Based on the current system, that single account that you're required to hold in the bank, sir, the limit is only $25,000 in relation to any particular coverage that the institution has. Because this system protects accounts, sir. There are some people that may be lucky enough, sir, to have a few accounts and they can spread a little risk across 4 or 5 institutions to get more coverage. But as you know, sir, the average man in Marhill Street, in my constituency, sir, don't have the privilege of having that type of coverage. And therefore, the importance of including credit unions into this infrastructure allows us then to ensure then that coverage is appropriately provided, given that the single account in the bank, as it stands now, is limited with respect to the coverage of 25,000. And therefore, this is important for, as the reasons that I outlined earlier, is to broaden the level of protection with respect to the membership, and therefore it is a sensible thing to do, is what they've advocated for, sir, to ensure that there is greater financial inclusion from an institutional perspective, and that the average citizens who, as you know, this time of year, sir, almost all the credit unions go through their AGMs, and therefore the timing of the passage of this legislation, which I hope will get the support of this chamber, is important because it improves the governance, sir, of these institutions, and it would allow them now to start a different kind of conversation, sir, about the requirements, not just from a fiduciary responsibility, given that we've seen a lot of consolidation over the past couple of years, and that to participate in this system now, sir, is going to require a number of changes operationally within the institutions. From the perspective now that obviously you have to do more reporting, your data records and all of that will need to be up to date. And I think it is important that the average citizen understands that it is not the government who wants to get into your business, sir. The government's role through the regulators is to ensure that institutions are doing the things that they're supposed to do to mitigate against risk, to prevent any institution from failing. Whilst we can never 100% do that, this mechanism is to ensure then that all of the systems and the data and information at all institutions, all financial institutions who participate in the deposit insurance framework, that you must have up-to-date information. Because imagine, sir, that the Senate is a credit union. The credit union itself, sir, should know and have up-to-date information on all of our balances. Because if something had happened to the institution, it must be able to certify within a particular time to the BDIC that these are the balances that were held for each of us as members in here. And therefore the reporting over time on this information is going to be important in much the same way as you would have regular reporting for your capital adequacy ratios, the delinquency loan, the non-performing loans, and those types of traditional things. It gets a lot more granular now because this is now where the balance on each of the accounts for each credit union member must be almost available, sir, in real time. And that continuous access to information is key. So I just want to make it clear, sir, that the government isn't seeing any of this because that's not our job. This is a regulatory matter, and therefore it is important that Barbadians understand that the sharing of accurate information is important for the integrity, sir, of the system for people to trust in. And therefore, credit unions in of itself now have to start to put those systems in place such that in the same way that people send you an annual statement, sir, to tell you what's in your account, you can check it online these days. It's a lot easier today, certainly, than it was 20 years ago, sir, when this thing was started, with all the digitization and the efforts that are in place. And so it is just a change of reporting into the BDIC to ascertain, obviously, exactly what the balances are, such that we can avoid any particular issues if and when, sir, a matter should arise that requires resolution. And so, sir, we contemplate, and I say this, I'm not sure if there are any lawyers in the chamber, sir, but yes, they are. Yes, yes, sorry. But under the current framework, if everything, sir, and when I say everything goes well, I mean, should an institution fail, and everything is in order, it would take somewhere between 3 to 15 months, sir. And I'm saying that if everything goes well, it would take minimum 3 to 15 months to get people paid. Which, as you and I both know, sir, that if a bank failed in Barbados tomorrow, sir, certainly I don't have much here now. But and I don't say that lightly. I cannot imagine, sir, the circumstances upon which not just me, but the government, all of us, would be inundated with questions and queries about what happened, when they can get my money, and all of that. And therefore, it is unacceptable that even with everything working in the way that the current process allows, it will take 3 to 15 months in order for people to be paid. What we are contemplating in this particular iteration of the bill is to reverse that. So rather than have an institution, when it fails, go to court and get all of that court action in the way before people are paid. The reason I said earlier, sir, that institutions have to have up-to-date information is that our aim, sir, given all the technology that we have, is that within a 7-day period, sir, based on the information that's been provided, should an institution fail, sir, the BDIC will be in a position, sir, to pay people within 7 days. Now, if you or I, sir, have a particular disagreement, then we can still go to court, because there's still other assets within the process that may need to be disposed of, and we can go to court for that. But the idea here is to ensure that we can restrict any contagion, and by contagion I mean a bank run, fear, the concern that especially in a small country like Barbados, sir, if a financial institution fails like a bank or a credit union, then you can understand the kind of panic and pressure that would ensue as a result of that kind of thing. And therefore, we are changing the mechanism with respect to liquidation should an institution fail, such that if the central bank or the Financial Services Commission deems that an institution needs to be wound up, that the BDIC will, within a 7-day period, pay all of the people up to the insured coverage, and then deal with any residual assets that may need to be disposed of in an orderly fashion, such that you don't have individuals waiting 10 years, sir, as was the case with respect to CLICO and the way that whole judicial manager process played out, not just in Barbados, but across the Caribbean, and left people less than satisfied with respect to this. Now, I say this, sir, and I reiterate, this is something that I hope we never ever have to use in Barbados, because our regulators have been doing a good job of ensuring that things that have been identified, that institutions can correct those issues. But this is something that we hope, sir, and I repeat it again, that we never have to use. And therefore, we will be reviewing every 5 years the coverage levels that are required, and to have it done automatically. So in the previous bill, the existing bill, the limit was stated as 25,000 as an Act of Parliament. We are going to change that mechanism and have an automatic system whereby every 5 years we will review the coverage level that is required to maintain a 95% coverage rate, sir, and have the institutions increase their premiums appropriately to ensure that we can maintain those coverage levels. And that way, sir, the system then becomes much more responsive, much more robust, and that Barbadians, wherever they are, can be assured that the accounts that they have in the system then becomes that they're that there's greater coverage. Now, why is this important, sir? As I said, if you have a level of automaticity, sir, with respect to the increase in the coverage level, it means that people don't got to be running about the place, having accounts in different banks, and maintaining all these banking relations that, I say banking, but financial relations that they need, that they, I mean, of course, if you've got a lot of money, that is the only option. But I think it is important that we understand that we need a progressive approach with respect to the increase in coverage, and therefore we are going to change that as part of this new bill to ensure that the automaticity is built in to the system with a review every 5 years to make that happen. And of course, those conversations will take place not just with BDIC, but certainly with the two regulators, Central Bank and the Financial Services Commission in this instance, as well as the specific stakeholders to make sure that we can get people fully covered. And so this is very, very, very important, sir, because if we are going to see greater financial innovation, people must have greater confidence that they can put whatever monies they have into the financial sector, have those monies deployed, and of course, the confidence around the regulation, as I've said to both the Central Bank and the FFC, whilst government has started and supported the enhancement of financial literacy, these are the kinds of robust explanation that institutions themselves have to explain with their members, but we need to ensure that there is greater financial literacy right across the board in relation to how these things make a difference, sir, to ordinary people's lives. And so it is important that this is placed in the context that where the financial sector is making more and more strides in relation to the factors, sir, and those regulations around what banks now have to report in relation to accounts, as we are bringing in Basel III regulations, as institutions get larger, capital adequacy ratio gets larger, sir. It is going to be important that people get a better understanding that the more successful a credit union becomes, the more important it is to the Barbados economy. Then it means that the scrutiny on their behalf, but not just scrutiny from a regulatory side, sir, has to be enhanced. And therefore, that conversation we've been having with the Credit Union League, we've been having it with the boards and the management, because we have seen this tremendous growth in assets within the credit union sector, and we expect it to continue to grow, sir. And certainly with this intervention, it will equally grow, and therefore those corporate structures and the governance around how you manage these institutions by nature will have to evolve. And I think the sector certainly gets it, and therefore how that change is felt and experienced, I think, by the members is really where the conversation needs to be now had between the league, the institutions, supported by the regulators, to ensure that people understand and appreciate that the type of record keeping, the type of scrutiny in relation to credit acquisition and the like, sir, is going to be important, because Barbados has long passed the FATF threshold, sir, as you know, money supply of $5 billion US. And as we've exceeded that threshold, there are certain requirements that we now have to say that our full financial architecture is not just compliant, sir, but the compliance allows our people now to do investment, not just in Barbados, but outside of Barbados. And therefore, our money and our systems are clean, and us being able to prove that makes a difference, sir, to their lives. And so this deposit insurance to include credit unions, I think, sir, is a very, very progressive step, given the nature of the robust growth that we've seen within the sector. Yes, there's been some consolidation, but the consolidation for the better. And therefore, we feel that this is not just timely, but that we are in a position, sir, to unleash, I think, sir, the financial talents of many Bajans. Of necessity, sir, the board of the BDIC will have to be changed to include the Financial Services Commission, because that is, given that the coverage will only included banks before, that will change as a result. Now, what I want to also impress upon you, sir, that the BDIC has been working with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in terms of getting some technical assistance on these matters, because the credit unions, sir, paid for their own TA, the consultants through the World Credit Union League, to ensure that they were prepared for the transition, sir, and we received the technical assistance from the FDIC to help support this particular process. And I think as we continue to implement some of these reforms, that the ordinary citizen will then see that there are tangible benefits with respect to why it is important for compliance, why it is important that institutions provide them with the right information in a timely fashion, sir, which is part of how we see people fully participating, sir, in the economy. As the government itself, in having restarted the domestic capital market on our side, sir, our engagement with all of the financial stakeholders in the economy, which includes individuals, sir. And I will say that with the launch of BIMPAY, it is our expectation, sir, that we would be able to, in real time, not just on government side, but encouraging more and more companies either to go on the stock exchange, either to raise capital, that we have to embrace technology and the provision of information, because it is the provision of information, sir, that allows people to be confident that companies are well run, that these institutions are well run, and that they can have the confidence to place their hard-earned dollars into these institutions, and that in real time, that we will be in a position, sir, to not just invest, but to get information back from whether it's government, whether it's corporate entities, whether they're small businesses, to ensure that we use these technologies, sir, to ensure then that we can grow the Barbados economy. And therefore, we cannot hold back with respect to the embracing of the technology, because it is that is going to allow us to see and feel what is happening with respect to the economy. And I trust, sir, that with the new approach with respect to the provision of information on these financial matters, that Barbadians will take the time, sir, to discern what is legitimate investment from, because as you know, sir, frauds are frauds are frauds. It doesn't matter whether you're analog fraud or digital fraud. But it really is incumbent upon all of us within the financial ecosystem in Barbados to be as aggressive as we can be in relation to protecting Barbadians from themselves. And therefore, whilst we are here to provide deposit insurance, that deposit insurance is only as good, sir, as people making decisions, sir, on their phone, because I saw this just yesterday or the day before, the Central Bank putting out a notice on social media of people receiving WhatsApp calls purporting to want to do business. Now, sir, if somebody calls you out the blue and says to you, well, today's Wednesday, that if you give them $100 today, that they can give you $500 on Friday, then you must know, sir, that there's nothing that, if I could achieve such a return, sir, I would have a little more here in terms of financing government's program. But the point is, when people offering something that is too good to be true, sir, and you go and you engage, the deposit protection that we are putting in place can't help you, sir, because you have used your money willingly to participate. There's no protection from that. There's no protection from that. And therefore, we each have to be, I suppose, each other's brother and sister's keeper, sir, because the financial success of this country relies on us being able to have Barbadians, when they earn their money, that they can invest that money in legitimate opportunities. And I think by working with the credit union sector in this instance, as well as the wider financial institution, that whilst government can't tell you what to do with your money, sir, that at least if we have an ecosystem of trusted partners that can say, this is legitimate, this company is a legitimate company, operating in Barbados or wherever the partnership happens to be, that we have a mechanism whereby of due diligence and trust that makes people confident to make an investment. Because at the end of the day, sir, these deposits that we are intending to protect by extending to the credit unions, we want those monies mobilized to drive growth in the economy. And when the rates of return comes back, we want you to put those money back into the same credit unions and banks, sir, as a circular thing until you find a next opportunity to be able to invest. And so it is important that we understand that the system, sir, the system must work hand in hand. And I think that with the type of support that we have seen through the financial sector assessment program, which both the central bank and the FFC have both undertaken since 2014 or so, sir, that we will bring that now closer to home to people, so that when they see these nice reports, that they understand how they fit in to those reports, and that when we say that we are off of everybody's list, sir, that being off of everybody's list means that the due diligence that's required of all of us is less, is standardized, so that we can get on with the business, sir, of investing and growing this economy. And so, sir, these things are important. They cover individual accounts, they cover joint accounts, sir, corporate accounts, everything. Now, sir, I should point out, you and I are brothers, sir, and we just happen to have a joint account. In this legislation, if something should happen to a bank, sir, or credit union in this instance, sir, at the time of resolution, it will be assumed that you and I have an equal share in the money in the account. Unless, of course, there is some documentation that says that you have in more than me. What's the reason for this, sir? Documentation is important. We know that family members, and we live in an aging society now, sir, we have issues of increased dementia and Alzheimer's. People are being using the sons and daughters to be able to administer the financial arrangements, and so there's nothing wrong with that. But should something happen, the assumption will be that it's 50-50. If you and I, if it's you and I and the Honourable Deputy President, it will be split in three. And therefore, these are just some operational things that we must point out from the outset that are embedded into any resolution process, and therefore the coverage will then be split based on the balance between either the two of us or three of us, sir, as the case may be. And so this is intended to give clarity should an institution fail. We continue, sir, to strengthen the regulatory framework across the board. We have been working across the region, central bank to central bank, and even other commissions, because as you would appreciate, sir, as the credit unions get larger, then they have to be brought into the formal part of the surveillance system, and the central bank has been monitoring the two largest institutions now for at least about 10 years or so as they get larger. And that is good news, because it means then that Barbadians have had confidence in those institutions to place their resources, and as the others are continuing to grow by way of mergers and acquisitions, well, not merger, by consolidation, then we will see those balance sheets continue to rise, and therefore they have the capacity and the girth to be able to respond to the regulatory as well as the operational demands that the provision of deposit insurance, sir, would require of them to do. It is instructive, sir, that we are at a time now when the ability, especially with the digital wallets, sir, the digital wallets are available. And so I know, sir, that if an institution happens to fail, the ability for you to pay me becomes important. And therefore, by having the availability of a digital wallet, not necessarily with the same bank or institution that failed, but the access to a digital wallet now allows for this process by the BDIC, should it ever have to execute that process, sir. The availability of a digital wallet makes it easier now for people to be paid, rather than to have a specific bank account or to be running about the place, sir, trying to find a bank to get the money and all of this kind of thing. So the times that we are living in, we are trying to make sure that obviously the regulatory space is keeping pace with the environment that we're living in, and therefore again, the type of education and awareness that is going to be required for this is part of the financial literacy broader framework that we are rolling out, sir. But as I said, I live in hope that we never ever have to utilize this type of facility, because we've been able to continue not just to do the appropriate regulation, but that the managers at these institutions are making decisions on a day-to-day basis that, one, protects the depositors. They're still going to make some profits, sir, because as you would appreciate, sir, financial institutions are in the business of making profits. In this instance, credit unions, they share that profits amongst their members, so they're no less, that is part of the ethos, as opposed to dividends going out of Barbados, which is the case on the banking side. But the motive is the same. They are in the business of making money, and therefore they must take some risks. But those risks must be mitigated and supported obviously by appropriate documentation. And yes, things may happen from time to time, as is the case, but it is the tolerance of that risk within the context of the balance sheet that ordinary Barbadians now must understand and appreciate, that the system that we are setting up is contingent on the people that they hire to run the institutions on their behalf, making the best possible decisions in relation to not just credit decisions, but the actual management, sir, of the institution. And those are some of the things that, from a regulatory side, the league and the members have already started to engage on. With some of them have already appointed non-executive directors to help strengthen the boards because of the size of the institutions, which, as you know, sir, credit unions typically appoint boards from within, and part of ensuring that you have the right type of expertise on the boards to ensure that as institutions get larger, that they are focused in relation to or more focused, I should say, in relation to the not just the regulatory side, but the changing business landscape. Is important to have those perspectives represented on the board to ensure then that they can make the best possible decisions. And so we are confident, sir, that with this implementation, that as soon as this bill is passed and assented to, that the BDIC, in collaboration with the Credit Union League, as well as the members, will start the real work of onboarding the credit unions into the system, as I said, sir, government will support with 1.7 million to support the kickstart of the fund, and that we then can see over the course of the next few years that credit unions have in place for their members and ordinary Barbadians the similar level of protection that the banks and the Part 3 institutions have been enjoying, sir, for the almost past 20 years. And so this is, I think, a tremendous moment for the country, and we have more work to do in relation to, as I said, sir, financial literacy, and to ensure that ordinary Barbadians understand that they have to hold their institutions to account in the same way that the government, through the regulatory agencies, Central Bank and FFC, because these institutions belong to you. And therefore, we will work together with ordinary Barbadians to ensure that they are not just protected, but that they take the appropriate level of risk supported with the relevant information to ensure then that they can participate fully in the rest of the economy. And so, sir, we, through the FFC, later this year, will be ushering in a new set of reforms within the space to further support the inclusion under the deposit insurance framework. And I think that at that time, sir, certainly this chamber as well as the other place will be updated, and the country will be updated appropriately, because the financial inclusion ultimately is part of the mission of the government to ensure then that growth is inclusive, and a key part of that is to ensure that financial inclusion is at the center of that agenda. And so we are going to complete the technical work, sir, and ensure then that the board is reconstituted to have the interests of the FFC, as I mentioned there, and to the extent that we are currently also working on a new bankruptcy and insolvency framework. More broadly is going to be important, but I think I should say that if an institution fails, sir, that the BDIC, being appointed as the liquidator, will be the entity that takes charge of the running of any institution under obviously strict guidelines in relation to whether the central bank or the FFC. And taking that responsibility means then that within the shortest possible time that they can have all assets disposed of to ensure that all appropriate creditors, shareholders, whoever the case is, that those matters can be resolved as quickly as possible. And so these reforms, I think, are critical for there to be greater confidence in the financial system. And I hope that in the next few weeks, as we roll out with the partnership of, as I said, the league and the membership of the league, that we will be in a position, sir, then to over the course of the next couple of years, to ensure then that all the systems are in place technologically at each institution to support the ongoing reporting requirements for surveillance in the system, such that the confidence that we expect to see the continued growth in deposits in these institutions, that maybe within a 10-year period we may very well see that move from 20% to as close to 40 to 50% as possible across the landscape. And therefore, as we have already seen, sir, there has been a steady retreat or consolidation on the banking side, that our indigenous financial institutions, sir, there is space for growth within that, And I think that this is an important element for allowing them to be able to accommodate some of those changes. And so, sir, I thank you for the opportunity to pilot this bill today, and I look forward, sir, to the contributions from honourable members. I'm obliged to you. I beg to move, sir, that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister of Finance. Speakers, Senator Gurridge.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much. And good morning to everyone else who's here. Good morning to Barbados. And it is an honor and pleasure of mine to have to speak on this Protection of Depositors Bill 2026. I support the objectives of the bill. I believe that every Barbadian who entrusts their savings to a licensed bank or a credit union deserves confidence that, should the institution fail, there is a credible and well-governed system and a mechanism of protection capable of protecting those insured deposits. And as the Minister of Finance stated, we really don't want the businesses to fail at all, but the bill is there as pretty much a safeguard just in case. You know that one must always prepare for the negative just as much as you could prepare for the positive. So the bill modernizes our deposit insurance framework. It strengthens the role of the Barbados Deposit Insurance Corporation, and it aligns Barbados with international best practices in financial stability. But I must state, I wrote a note so that I don't forget, and it states that good legislation has to be measured by the strength of the mechanisms that ensure that the bill's objectives are achieved. So right now we're looking at how the objectives of the bills could be achieved based on every clause that is drafted in the bill which is presented before the Senate. So my first concern was the accountability and the timeline. And the timeliness, sorry. So I was looking at section 16, sir, and without going into the details of that section, I know that that section requires that the corporation has to prepare audited financial statements and an annual report within 4 months after the end of the financial year, yes? And the minister must then lay those reports before Parliament within 6 weeks. And this is the statutory timeline that was given. The difficulty, Mr. President, is that we know the tardiness that happens with, government departments and state-owned enterprises when it comes to bringing reports in a timely manner, shall I say. So we have to look at the fact that there are no consequences whatsoever if those deadlines are missed. So that's the area that I was looking at, because I noticed, sir, that particularly throughout our public administration, we have seen examples of statutory reports reaching to Parliament months or sometimes even years later. And it is problematic, especially when we're looking at building public confidence. The moment that you don't see the reports, then of course, public can't have confidence in the institution and say, well, everything is working well. So that is a problem. And ironically, this bill, it imposes strict penalties on private institutions. And so when I look at section 25.4 and 28.1, it provides penalties for up to $1,000 per day for member institutions that fail to submit required information or fail to make required payments. In other words, the private institutions are subject to financial penalties for failing to meet the statutory obligations, while the corporation itself, as you see, faces no statutory consequence if it fails to meet its own reporting obligations. So when we're looking at accountability there, sir, what I'm saying is that if we're going to do that for the private entities, then what happens to the corporation? What happens when they are late? It wouldn't be fair. So looking at the issue of accountability, then my recommendation is that you have to fix that in the bill so that, you know, it urges then the corporation to meet its obligations. So, sir, the bill imposes those financial penalties on the private institutions for failing to meet the statutory obligations, yet provides no comparable mechanism to ensure that the corporation and the minister comply with their own reporting obligations. That is my statement, and accountability should be reciprocal. So where statutory deadlines are missed, Parliament should receive a mandatory written explanation together with a revised timeline for compliance. So that is my recommendation, and I therefore recommend an amendment requiring that where the corporation fails to comply with the statutory deadlines, the minister must, within a specified period, lay before Parliament a written statement explaining the reasons for the delay. A revised completion date should be provided. The explanation be published together with the outstanding report. And persistent non-compliance be referred to the Public Accounts Committee or another appropriate parliamentary committee for review. Sir, I also want to state that one of the other harms that I recognized in the bill would have been with reference to section 22 to 24, which allows the minister after consultation to prescribe the percentage of insurable deposits that members of the fund must pay. I just want to state that this uncertainty is unnecessary and that businesses do tend to thrive on certainty and not where there is uncertainty. So there needs to be certainty, sir, and those are two vulnerable areas in which I noted in the bill, and I would strongly recommend that those areas be amended. And I know this is not the committee stage, but those are my recommendations, sir. So, sir, apart from that, I just want to make note on two other facts. The bill does not state the insured limit, and that was my strongest criticism there. Section 29 provides that the deposits are insured up to the insured limit, but the amount is not contained in the Act. So when I review some other statutes, sir, I would have recognized that the public really cannot determine from the legislation itself whether deposits are insured up to 25,000, 50,000, 100,000. So internationally, the insured limit is often a central feature of the scheme because it directly affects, of course, the public confidence. And sir, there was no fixed time for paying the depositors, and that I noted in section 30. So even though, yes, the Minister of Finance would have rightfully highlighted a lot of positives concerning the bill, what I'm stating is that there are still a number of vulnerabilities concerning the said bill, sir. And I note them, and number one, the insured limit is not stated in the bill and may be changed by ministerial order. I note that there's no statutory deadline for paying the insured depositors after a bank or credit union fails. I also note that the minister is given broad discretion over key aspects of the scheme without requiring parliamentary approval of major decisions. I also note there's no effective enforcement mechanism if the corporation or the minister fails to meet the reporting obligations as I just mentioned in section 16. And the bill should include stronger transparency measures, including post-liquidation reporting and periodic legislative review. And those are just my submissions, sir, on the bill. So I thank you for listening to me, and those are my respectful submissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Goodrich. And more speakers, Senator Maladu.
Thank you, Mr. President. As usual, I will seek to be brief. First of all, I would like to start by congratulating and complimenting the Minister from that other place who has joined us today in your presentation, which I thought was clear and concise, and I much appreciated it. I want to rise in support, complete support of this bill as it extends to protecting our ordinary depositors, and this has been long overdue. It has been there for persons who were making deposits in the commercial banks, and the credit union movement is an extremely important part of the fabric of Barbados, and to see it extended now to there is a welcome position. It actually is a kind of a strange situation that we've had, because the Minister said, Mr. President, that the credit unions are required to hold their money in the commercial banks. So the credit unions might themselves have, I think he said, as much as 200,000 individuals who have money, and then that is held in 1 or 2 or 3 accounts, and then that is limited to $25,000 in each one. So this fixes that problem immediately, and I think that the commercial banks are happy that you're fixing it, because they themselves were finding it in a little bit of a difficult position. I would make a couple of comments where I think that over time I think the bill could be strengthened. I would say to you that I'm always concerned with how people react to insurance. You know, if you are walking across a tightrope, and if you fall, it is going to be certain death, you will walk a lot more carefully than if you have a net below you. So I sometimes worry about insurance. Car insurance, does that mean that because you have car insurance, you should drive recklessly? If you have fire insurance, does that mean you don't need to worry to turn off your stove? So I worry sometimes about what people view as insurance. And I just say that insurance is not a substitute for good governance. And I think that this is where, in the future, we need to make sure the FSC is on top of these matters very, very carefully. The other thing I would comment about in the bill is that the bill treats the credit unions in the same way it treats the commercial banks in terms of the premiums to be paid. And I wondered if the premiums to be paid should not be risk-based. And if there is in fact a higher risk or a lower risk in one area or another, it maybe should not be one premium across the entire thing. It should be a risk-based premium, because that is ultimately what we are doing here. So by adding the credit unions in, one might reach the conclusion that the credit unions are less risk and therefore should pay less of a premium. Or perhaps you will reach the conclusion that the credit unions, in comparison to the commercial banks, are of a higher risk, and therefore the premium on their deposit insurance that they need to pay is different. I don't think it should be built into the bill that it is clearly the same premium between the two. So I think that that could, in time, be an improvement made on it. I would also say that while I understand the intention, and I've heard it discussed in the other place, and I've also seen it in the media, that we're talking about this 7-day period for payout. I can find that nowhere in the bill. What I can find is that it now reads as soon as possible. But I don't exactly know what as soon as possible means. And I do appreciate that the intention may be 7 days, but if in fact a hard number wanted to be put in there, maybe we should have done that. Let us not tell someone that it is 7 days when in fact the words that we'd have used is simply as soon as possible. One other comment I'd like to make, sir, is on the insurance. A lot of the language in this bill speaks to how government treats with the premiums having been received. And this is quite important. One of the things that it says in there is that you can't be insuring a risk and then taking that money and reinsuring it back into, or investing it back in the very same person who you're insuring it from. So it has some very clear limitations as to how you can use that money. And I think that also needs a bit more clarity, because it's not absolutely clear to me that when it says bonds, etc., that where exactly they're going to find these instruments that are not they themselves instruments of the financial institutions who we are insuring against. And I'm sure there's an answer to that, and I'm sure the minister who is here will be able to tell us how that is going to be restricted and how we can be sure that the premiums that we are collecting are not then reinvested in the risk that we are insuring. Okay? And I want to extend that to a point that I have made on a previous occasion, speaking of something like this, when we talk about property and casualty insurance in Barbados. Today was the first occasion that I have been in the Senate since we've entered into the hurricane season. I was very pleased to hear our prayers today included one to spare us again. And I worry, as I've said before, that the same assets of the insurance companies in Barbados who are insuring us against a hurricane, they themselves are limited with what they can invest in. And I would like to encourage with the Minister here for a liberalisation of what the insurance companies can invest in outside of Barbados. I've said before that I see when those insurance companies, when they get $100 in premium, they might be reinsuring $90 of that overseas, so they're spreading the risk overseas. But it might be useful for us to think about what are the investments that those insurance companies should hold, because just like this bill, which separates and says, if I'm insuring a risk here, I don't take the premium and reinvest it in the same risk area. We should do the same thing. Don't tell me that we are insuring a house in St. George and backing it by a house that we have an asset for in St. Philip. Because when a hurricane hits Barbados, all the assets are hurt the same way. So I'm encouraging us to look broadly, see the greatness of this bill, and extend it to insurance companies and all forms of insurance. Lastly, sir, I would just want to ask, as I think this was said in the other place as well, that the public concern with opening bank accounts and so on, especially in the commercial banks, there has been a lot of friction there. And I do hope that in including the credit unions into this insurance scheme, which, as I said, I support, it is properly done, it's well formulated, it is well thought out. I do hope, though, that we also remember that as we strengthen the depositor protection, we must not create another layer of paperwork that makes it harder for the ordinary people and businesses to achieve the financial services, because those things have been imposed upon us from outside of Barbados, but our credit unions are within Barbados, and let us try to make it as frictionless as possible and not impose upon them. So, Mr. President, as normal, with those few words, I am in full support of this bill, and I do look forward to seeing ways that it could be strengthened in the future. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Malalu. Senator Ali.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would say that in looking at this piece of legislation, and looking at this piece of legislation in terms of social engineering, we need to recognize that it speaks to an equality that has not existed before. It speaks to the idea of the member of the credit union being an equal financial citizen in Barbados. We've offered protection to depositors in banks, and widening this net, we are recognizing that the credit unions, as the Honourable Minister has indicated, assets have grown sevenfold. There is a need to say to the depositors within the credit union that we recognize you need the protection, and you will be taken care of in the same manner that we will take care of any depositor. When you consider the average credit union citizen, you are considering the average middle class person. You're thinking of our police, our teachers, our nurses. You're looking at what we've often considered the bedrock of our societal stability. And they, just as any other category, require that protection. When I hear that the objective is to cover, or we will be in a position, hopefully, to cover 95% of those depositors, that speaks to the stability which we are offering our financial sector, a major part of our financial sector. And that protection is not an esoteric concept. I have the experience of supporting the judicial manager in seeking to solve the problem that was CLICO. In that position, and I believe the minister would have referenced the 10 years that Barbadians had to wait and suffer, and I would say that we are only now dealing with the EC policyholders, now 15, 16 years on. So Barbadian policyholders had the benefit of a government that stood up and said we needed to act, and actually did something to assist them where there was no legislative framework necessarily in place in the manner in which we are discussing today. EC policyholders did not have similar benefit with their governments in terms of their position to possibly safeguard those policyholders. And the cents on the dollar that those individuals are receiving hurts at the core. In that position, I would have seen the retired persons who made their investments feeling that I've put my nest egg to protect me in my final years without being a burden to my family. I would have seen the parents who would have invested for the purposes of their children's education. I would have seen children who now had to worry about how they were going to take care of their familial relations. That is the type of pain that occurs where we do not put these types of safeguards in place. And that middle class category of our society is not a class that can take that type of pain. Deposits within the credit union system are often not for long-term value. Some persons are capable of, yes, using it as a safeguard, and they build up their deposits in terms of saying this is my nest egg. But you take away that from a person a day where you have persons who are living day to day in terms of their financial resources. You cripple them immediately. You cripple them in a manner that it is not easy to recover from. So that when the Honourable Minister speaks of speed in this legislation, in terms of when we can get to a position that persons can receive their money, that is a major element that must be addressed, and the government must be commended in that regard. The nature of judicial management in the CLICO matter meant that it had to take a winding road through our judicial system. There was the issue of what assets backed up the insurance company. And it brings me to the concept where I would suggest that then the very next steps in terms of offering this financial protection should extend to the insurance sector. Many people invest in annuities and the like in the insurance sector. And in many countries, there is an insurance scheme similar to the depositor insurance concept here to protect those policyholders and those investments and to allow for the return of monies in a timely manner. If something like that had existed in the context of our insurance sector, the CLICO policyholders would have been better served. Right now, we have a very vibrant and hands-on regulator in terms of the Financial Services Commission. And we would have seen in the newspaper recent activity where they're taking action that they see fit to try and protect policyholders and the like. But the insurance legislation as it stands now allows for investment in statutory assets that are supposed to safeguard depositors. But where those statutory assets are in the nature of real estate holdings or the like, there is going to be no quick resolution for the benefit of any policyholder. The realization of those assets in a manner that would allow policyholders to get back their investments and get back their money is compromised. Now, on paper and on the balance sheet, and my friend Mr. Niles will say, you know, I got it on the balance sheet and I can see where the asset matches the liabilities, but that is a balance sheet and that is not the nature of life experiences. So the speed with which we can return these monies is a critical element of this legislation, a necessary element of the legislation. In looking at and I will be careful, in looking at the recent examples, and I mentioned CLICO, the Honourable Minister mentioned trade confirmers. One aspect that I believe we need to consider in legislation of this type is empowering regulators, liquidators, and the like in terms of going after those persons who have committed any degree of fraud or any degree of gross negligence that has resulted in the failing of the institution. It strikes people at their core where they have lost substantial savings or substantial investments, and they can see persons who they believe to be partially responsible walk in the streets seemingly with no need to answer or account for what they have done and the pain and suffering they have caused. The average Barbadian wants to know, you know, we speak of being fair, we speak of treating each other as you would wish to be treated. But when you know that your mother, your grandmother died in debt, not being taken care of, where she had slaved and saved and invested for years, and then individuals who we think or assume may have played a part in that go scot-free, is offensive. And this type of legislation has to embolden and give the necessary safeguards to the regulators to make that an easy process. Many regulators set systems where certain thresholds are hit, there's immediate action. If this threshold is failing in the institution, immediately there are sanctions that are visited and we will clear it up early. Now, it is maybe inappropriate for an attorney who should speak about best practices and the right to be heard and the like to be putting forward this type of proposal. But where you are dealing with the livelihoods of persons, those best practices need to be sort of compromised. Let's safeguard and then deal with the best practices after. You want to go to court, you want to litigate it, you can do all that. We aren't going to take away any of your rights, but you need to make sure that you've done right by the people who have placed their faith and trust in you. So I would suggest that those are some of the next steps we need to be looking at in the context of this type of legislation, and expanding it, as I said, possibly to the insurance sector, because many persons are investing in that sector just as they will put their money in a bank and feel it's a safe bet. Just a few comments on some of the issues raised by Senator Goodridge in terms of safeguards, filing of audited financials and the like. And maybe it is stated with no recognition of the role that the Financial Services Commission is playing presently in terms of these types of mechanisms, where entities, central bank, similarly relative to banking institutions, the mechanisms are found in the regulations and the rules in terms of how these entities operate. The filing of audited statements and the like comes with sanction where they're not met. It isn't necessary that you are going to see it in the legislation itself. It does not mean it does not exist. And similarly, in the context where the senator raised the issue, well, why are you not stating that percentage? The Honourable Minister needs a certain degree of flexibility in these financial times. It can't be that when he needs to address a change in percentage based on prevailing economic circumstances, often which have nothing to do with Barbados, that he needs to come back to Parliament to change a piece of legislation so he can say the percentage is going up or down. There's a reason why certain elements are not stated with a distinct clarity. You need to ensure that the parties who have the responsibility to manage these things have the flexibility to do the job at hand. And it can't be that we run back to Parliament to pass legislation, to amend legislation, to simply do the necessaries related to the management of these types of issues. And my friend, Senator Malalu, is speaking with very solid insurance principles when he speaks of risk assessment in terms of premiums. Any good insurance professional will tell you that is how we go about our endeavor. But I believe there's a practicality existing in the context of what the government is attempting to do, which may override normal insurance principles. The Honourable Minister would have indicated that this deposit insurance has been in place for 20 plus years for the banking institutions. Government is now putting that seed to allow the credit unions to get up to speed. The credit unions now need to build their deposit facilities. And it can't be that we will introduce elements that may inhibit or limit the speed by which they can put themselves in the same state and bracket as the banking institutions. So I agree with the principles relative to risk assessment on premiums, but I would just caution that in terms, again, maybe where I started and end, the social engineering that we are attempting to do to safeguard a wide range of depositors, that can't be the first principle. That can't be where we start our assessment. And I think the bill offers a methodology to achieve what I believe the entire Senate will agree is a necessary change. And it does it in a manner that is meaningful. I understand the idea that we will grow that level and we will seek to get that 95% coverage across all financial institutions. That is substantial. That offers a real degree of protection to the average depositor. And in those circumstances, I rise to support this legislation.
Thank you very much, Senator Ali. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to all. Today seems so nice and mellow, and it's a wonderful feeling.
Probably due to crop over.
Yeah, and I don't plan to change that feeling and that mood.
Maybe one of our senators will sing about the wonderful feeling.
But Mr. President, thank you for acknowledging me to share a few comments on the Protection of Depositors Bill. It takes me back to when I got my first job, to own my first paycheck. My mother sent me to the credit union to open an account. Not to a bank, a commercial bank, but to a credit union. It took me back to getting my first loan from the credit union, where you hardly had money, but you were able to match what they wanted, to get what you want. But at the end of that loan also, Mr. President, they allowed you to accumulate savings over time. And it built up your financial situation. The credit union is a very important institution. And we need to protect the credit union movement. We need to protect the members. And it is on that backdrop that I support this bill as well. In the other place, the minister alluded to some statistics which show the amount of deposits in the system. I think there were numbers, there were like 408 million versus now 3 billion in 2007 versus 2025. But if you put it in a different context, Mr. President, in the financial architecture in Barbados in 2007, credit unions would have contributed about 4.7% of those deposits at that time. In 2025, that rose to 17%. So it shows the importance of the movement. It shows how the credit union movement has really taken on a bigger role in the financial architecture of Barbados and the livelihoods of Barbadians, especially those working class and middle class Barbadians as well. So I give this full support because if you're protecting the members that put the money in, and this is a real means of protecting those deposits, I think it should have the full support of all Barbadians. Mr. President, one of the things that I also went to look at is acknowledging the role that the credit union plays in allowing persons to have a decent livelihood, to buy a home, buy land, to buy the first, second or third hand motor vehicle. It really plays an important role in moving persons from one stage to the next. So it takes on a lot of risks. It takes on a lot of risks in that sometimes persons are delinquent. They might be in and out of jobs. The rate that they might repay some legal loans may not be at the rate that a normal financial institution, like a commercial bank, would want to be involved in that relationship with that person. But the credit union has really filled a gap in this regard. And when I looked at one of the major credit unions and their delinquency rate, or their delinquency ratio, I see about 13% at 2025, just over 13%. When I looked at the delinquency rate or ratio in the commercial banks, I see under 4%. So the credit unions are really taking on a whole lot of risks for its members. It could be good, it could be bad, because members are depositing monies, and those have to be managed astutely and carefully to the benefit of the said members. But I wouldn't feel good if I didn't ask for the commercial banks to really have a broader appetite to a little more risk, because the burden is really heavy on the credit union movement if you look at the numbers. If you look at the fact that their delinquency is 3 times higher than that of a commercial bank. And not that you want the commercial banks to give away their money and disregard the protection of the repayment of those funds, but it's to have a more appetite to lend Barbadians, because I know for a fact that I don't think the average person that takes out a loan, one, is foreseeing that he would be without a job to repay or without any source of income, whether it's a small business or a job to repay. And if he wants to run off with the asset, I think they're all well intended to be able to service that loan, acquire the asset, and move on. And I think then that gives us the comfort, and they should give those in the financial space the confidence to increase their appetite as relates to lending to Barbadians of all walks of life. And why is it important in this context? Because the credit union, although it has only 17% of the deposits in the financial architecture, it is taking on a lot of risk to support livelihoods in Barbados. So if we can spread some of that risk, we can spread some of that liability while we work on protecting the deposits, I think that will argue well for the sector and the individual lives of members as well. The credit union movement also plays an important role because they pay back a dividend. A commercial bank doesn't pay a dividend unless you buy a share independently. So it is a very important tool for Barbadians and for its members and for Barbados as a whole. And if this move now will give more confidence for persons to deposit money into a credit union, that means we can see that $3 billion moving over time to maybe $4 or $5 billion. We can see that 17% of the deposits moving to 30% or 35%. Who knows, Mr. President? But the point I'm making is that we need to spread the risk, spread the liability, and there's a populist saying, well, I won't go there, but the point is, the point is, Mr. President, that if we are all in this together, we should share the burden, Mr. President, right? So that's my point. I think we have the opportunity to put some pressure, and decent pressure, on the financial institutions, more so the commercial banks, to get involved with to increase and broaden their appetite to lending to Barbadians. Another point, Mr. President, is that I understand that the Financial Services Commission has been doing a good job as it relates to monitoring the financial institutions in Barbados, especially the credit unions. I'm told that it is done in a protective way, in a proactive way when it comes to monitoring the credit unions and the success of those credit unions and the likelihood of them being able to open their doors in the future. But as we broaden the deposit protection, as we've seen the evolution of deposits into the credit unions, as we've seen the important role of the credit unions play, I just want to urge the Commission to not drop the ball, to continue to be proactive, continue to strengthen their resources behind monitoring these funds. $3 billion of members' money sitting in those institutions, and we must not spare any resources to ensure that those resources are protected, not only from bad investments or just from bad oversight or slow or reactive monitoring of these financial institutions. My final comment, Mr. President, is the fact that there are a lot of smaller credit unions as well, which, in my understanding, will probably have to merge because of the regulatory fees and the way how things will have to be restructured in the organizations, and I would just implore the government to assist them financially through that process so that we can protect those members in those smaller credit unions, and they will not be disadvantaged in any way in terms of the mergers of the smaller credit unions. so that is done not only from a regulatory perspective, but from a financial perspective, where there are financial implications that can be cushioned or can be supported. I would implore that the government could also support those small credit unions financially as they transition into mergers and into being more stable for their members. And with those few words, I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Her Honor, Senator Thompson.
Sorry, sir, I was working. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Really just want to make a few observations, and they have to do, it's the way how I'm seeing the matters that are before the chamber today, and it has to do with the whole question of how a country or society grows its economy, builds wealth, ensures that there is wealth in new generations, and that wealth is sustainable. Several speakers today made the point of the importance of the legislation before the chamber in offering protections for average investors and small investors. We also spoke to the fact, sir, or speakers also made note of the kinds of crashes and collapses with very harmful consequences that we have seen in our lifetime today. Trade confirmers, CLECO, Norsham. I think there is another financial institution, even though it is not coming to the forefront of my mind right now. And all of these have suffered some element of collapse. And we speak of it now in a very sanitized way, the collapse of CLECO, the collapse of trade confirmers. But the reality is that without protection such as this, we really are not talking about the collapse of institutions, but the collapse of lives. And that is what this legislation is attempting to protect average Barbadians from. We speak now about CLECO, but I can tell you about people who lost their life savings. I can speak of people who were plunged into poverty because the collapse took place almost at the end of their working lives, and the money that they had put down for their future, for their children, just disappeared in a matter of waking up one morning and hearing the news story. And then they found themselves having to use the property in which they were living to finance debt or other challenges. And in consequence, there was nothing. They went into the genteel poverty, and you could see them, sir, darning their clothes because they couldn't buy new ones. You could see them making adjustments in the way that they lived. Not adjustments that they enjoyed, but adjustments that faced a challenge, that represented the face of a challenge. Marriages broke up because of the severity of the financial conflict into which families were thrown. A wife got up one morning to learn that the husband had picked up their investments or their money, and without conversation moved it all into CLECO, and that was the end of that. And she had no knowledge. And it happened in the reverse as well, where the wife was the one managing the resources, and she made, the husband gave money every month, and she would take whatever was left over from the house, and instead of splitting the investment in a number of institutions, put it all into one place because she thought that she would have gotten a higher premium. So what we are doing today really is not just about putting an instrument in place that is reflective on how financial institutions will operate, but it is about putting an instrument in place that ensures the security of the resources of people who spent perhaps years trying to put together a little something for themselves in their old age, to make their middle years more comfortable, or to ensure that they are passing something on to their children and grandchildren, and to put an end to that happening, to the destruction of those dreams, to the frustration of their efforts, and to the collapse of their mental well-being. People were plunged into illness, grappling every day with the thought that every cent you had saved for your whole working life was gone overnight. Really, people had mental health challenges coming out of it. You would meet persons who had suffered from in these collapses, and you would say hello, and before you could say anything else, it was all they could talk about, because it was the overwhelming and defining narrative of their lives. Everything came down to that single loss. So this is a significant piece of legislation, and I'm glad to see that we have been able to speak with a high degree of consensus and harmony, even to the point of sharing the benefit and sharing the burden and sharing the bounty. I was glad to see the Honourable Senator Waters adopted the language of the Prime Minister. I hope that that means that we are seeing shifts in his positions. Sir, I want to again apologize for my voice and coughing, and I repeat that I am severely allergic to the Sahara dust and environmental conditions, so I'm impacted every time. But, sir, for me, the conversation today really opens up wider questions. And it really is the issue of how we, and I started with the question of how we grow an economy and the nature of the investments that people make in the system. It was interesting for me to observe that even during the financial crisis, the global economy grew by a significant amount. That means that there always is or appears to be capital in the system. And the question is, how do we as a country use the capital that is in the system to improve the lives of what we call ordinary Barbadians or average Barbadians, but to build out an economy which is highly competitive and doing extremely well. I think, sir, that this is where, and Senator Walters did speak to it, the role of the wider banking system becomes important, and the degree of risk which the bank assumes. Our banks in Barbados have become very risk averse. There was a time when you had a banking manager, when you could go in and speak to the bank about a situation. I remember, sir, that after I got fired from the cabinet in 1999, I think it was. Sorry, what? Speak to him after when you see him. Sir, forgive me for being attracted to the aside, but it was such the question of why begged an interesting answer. At that point, sir, I had of course, it was. Actually, it was my parents' wedding anniversary, I think August 9th or 10th, and it was the middle of the month. And it meant, of course, that my income stopped immediately, but my bills did not. And therefore, at the end of that month, I was going to have bills but no income. And I decided after a few months, of course I went back to practice being trained in law, sir, and with the support of Sir Richard Cheltenham, former President of the Senate, I really started to do very well because his approach was, I have lots of work, come and do some stuff for me, and grew from there. So he gave me that initial cushion. But I was able, sir, because I had developed a name for myself, to do relatively well. And in a couple months, and this story is going somewhere, sir, back into the banking system, I promise you. In a couple months, I made a decision that if I was going to practice law, I was going to buy a building. And therefore, I went to the bank, sat with a bank manager, and discussed my circumstances and my aspirations. When the bank manager crunched the numbers, I was not the most attractive looking candidate. But the bank manager said, I will take a chance on you. Sir, I bought the building, then got another loan to outfit it, and paid both loans off. That building is now mortgage-free. The building was financed, but it was because the bank was prepared. You had a banking manager who would sit down with you and work out. And they determined that even though the ratios that banks use today, from the time you come into the bank and you say you want a loan, before they even hear you out, the first thing they are doing is crunching the numbers these days. So your bank manager is willing to tell you no in relation to a loan very, very easily. But in that instance, two people were prepared to look at my ratios and say that they are not ideal, but we are prepared to make an investment in you. I have remained the client of both banks as a result of that. And as I said, but the property is still in my possession with the mortgage completely paid off at the moment. And it was very well outfitted at the time. And I paid off that loan, the loan for outfitting it, before the loan period. I am making this point, sir, to share the experience where I was fortunate, maybe because I was able to articulate myself in a particular way, maybe because I was a politician who was known, maybe because it was that the bank manager felt sorry for me, maybe because it was that they trusted me, but they brought its social elements into consideration that our banks no longer consider. It is completely done now on the basis of what your ratios are, your debt to asset ratio, and no other considerations are factored in. So that is why, sir, that you could see that every single bank in Barbados in 2025 made a considerable profit over its 2024 margin, to the extent that the banks in Bridgetown last year walked away with $218.8 million in profit, while a lot of people who would have been good candidates for loans, etc., walked away from the bank with their hopes dashed and with nothing. And that answers the question, sir, that the Honourable Senator Walters put, of why the ratio for the credit union is so much higher than that of the bank. It has to do with the assumption of risk. But if we were to apply a 13% default ratio to the banking loans or banking profits, you would see that the banks would still be highly profitable. They would still have walked away with increased profits over the 2024 margins. And therefore, I join with Senator Walters, or maybe sir, he clearly wants to join with us, in a calling for banks to be more risk amenable or less risk averse in the way they look at people who come before them for loans. Most Barbadians, sir, are so happy to get the little loan that they do everything that they can to hold on to the property. And I'm going back, sir, and I'm giving these narratives because I want people to understand that politicians is people too, and understand what we go through. When I was fired from the cabinet, sir, no,
it was after that, sir, something happened. My loan was not paid on the property, was not paid for a month. And an officer from the bank called me to ask me not to support me, but to ask me if I wanted to sell it. And I said to her, Madam, I do not wish, and I have absolutely no intention of selling my property. If I have to suck salt to pay that mortgage, I will. Do not phone me ever again. And I put down the phone. 1 month I had missed. And that was the bank's response to a black person. Do you want to sell your property? I said, no, I do not. On another occasion, I tried to secure a loan, and these are the realities. I wanted to buy a bigger building for my practice. And the banking officer said to me, oh, I see you are married. Well, you would have to bring your husband. I said, well, if you can show me his law certificate, I can show you mine. And this is a building for my law practice. If you can show me his law certificate, you will see him. But if you can't show me his law certificate, you can't see him. Well, I could not figure it out. But men don't ever get told that they have to bring their wives, you know. These are the kinds of social biases that you see in the financial system. No, that is the reality. And women experience it all the time, and we do not talk about these things. But I go on further with making this the underpinning point that our banks can assume a bit more risk than they currently do, and that more people of all races would benefit, but particularly those who are disadvantaged and who are asked to bring all kinds of information and data to satisfy criteria that really often make no sense. So that getting access to capital becomes an exercise in frustration with the amount of things that you are asked to put up, with the amount of capital that you then have to use to secure the little bit of money that you are seeking to apply. Sometimes you are asked to put up a mortgage-free property worth far more than what you are seeking to borrow. I mean, some of it really does not make sense. And I would wish to see that we have a change of approach in the banking system. I turn then to the credit union, sir. I have to admit that as a young woman, I did not understand much about the credit union system, but I recall that it was the Barbados Labour Party government under Tom Adams that gave impetus to the credit union movement in Barbados by creating legislation, concessions, and other measures, which really is the foundation upon which the Barbadian credit union movement is built. And that, sir, shows the importance of government policy in relation to helping people to build wealth and capital, because Senator Walters and others spoke to the importance of the credit union movement given the strictures in relation to the traditional banking system, to show the gap that the credit union has served to fill for a number of ordinary and middle-class Barbadians who otherwise would have been considered unbankable and would not have been able to get access to capital and financing in this country. So that one Barbados Labour Party administration ensured that the foundation was put in place and the structure of the credit union was constructed and expanded on that foundation of legislation and policy. And a second Barbados Labour Party administration at this time is now ensuring that adequate protections are serving to help in the context of the credit union. I remember when that legislation was put in place during the Tom Adams era, sir, I had a temporary job at Customs. And a customs officer, far more senior than I, whose name I do not recall, came to me. I was, sir, barely probably 21, 22 years old. Didn't know anything about the credit union. I was hearing these things on the radio. And he came up and he said to me, put your money in the credit union. It is for all like we sow. It was a simple bit of advice given to me by a man who must have then been in his 40s or so, sir. And I was barely about 22 years old. Put your money in the credit union. And this is important in a country where a lot of young people are not truly encouraged to save or invest. Many people in our country do not start seriously saving or investing until very late in life. We don't start planning for our old age and and the age and years in which we are not going to be working. But we have to start to see opportunities for investment and access to capital as the way of building intergenerational wealth for the black community in Barbados. It is extremely important that we do so. And there are those who are sitting on capital in the banks, money in the credit union, shares in the credit union, and are not using it to invest. And I would wish to encourage black entrepreneurs and black people in the country who have wealth but are not investing it wisely or not investing it at all, to look to see what is the nature of the investment that they can make at this time that not only grows the economy, but grows wealth within their families. Because we have to get to the point in Barbados where families who look like, where the majority of Barbadians are able to have opportunities to ensure that the generations of their family will never be broke or poor again. That is very important for people that experience slavery and deprivation and colonization. And the reality is that unless we encourage it, and this is why I think it is the central bank and other government agencies are now having, I hear them on the radio, public announcements and information on financial management, financial literacy, building capital and so on. These are very important for us to learn, because the reality is that a lot of us would not have come out of families where we have had the experience of other family members who have been able to build wealth. And usually for a majority of people in the country, the single largest capital asset that we will own will be a house. We may only ever own one in our lifetime, and once we stop working, our capacity to maintain that property becomes very difficult, and after the children leave home and so on. So this issue of how we look at financial opportunity, the extent to which we seize financial opportunity, the level at which we would want to cooperate with others to build wealth, not just within the context of our family, a single family, but within the context of friends and family groupings, becomes really of extreme importance. In that regard, sir, I am extremely happy to be able to support the resolution, the legislation before the chamber, to really speak to the issue and consider how we will do broad investment as a people and the extent to which both the banks and the credit union, but particularly the credit union, can become levers for greater wealth building in the context of our society, particularly now that a lot of capital is floating through. There is a lot of money and liquidity in the banking system and in the financial market generally, and this must be used to ensure that people have a better, brighter future, and that now that the times are good, bearing in mind that times do become lean, that we seize the opportunity to make the most of it and to build for, not just for today, but for tomorrow. And with that, sir, I indicate that I'm much obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator, the Most Honourable Elizabeth Thompson. Honourable Minister of Finance, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I want to thank honourable members for their support. I reflect on some of the comments made, and to say that in relation to how we intend to deliver on not just accountability but flexibility, that we've drafted the legislation to ensure that the mechanism through which reforms can be undertaken, that the reforms can be done, sir, as flexibly as possible, but not without any less transparency or accountability built in. Routinely, ministers will publish orders where the BDIC, in collaboration with its members, in relation to any reviews of thresholds, which by order will be laid in Parliament, so all and sundry will be aware that from whatever date that such will be the case. And to the extent that any resolution framework that now is built out, sir, part of the reason I said that the focus now is to ensure that the member institutions have all of the necessary infrastructure and systems in place that allows the BDIC, should it be required to do so, sir, be able to settle within a 7-day period. So the reason the legislation speaks to as soon as possible is because obviously once we work out the mechanics in relation to not just the technical requirements, but ensuring then that communication with any affected members, there's a clear process and protocol in place for that requires a certain level of data quality, that once an institution has been deemed to be insolvent and then therefore the liquidation process has to take place, it means that the information, the records that the institution has for the members will have to be clear, such that the supervisory authority in relation to the resolution can actually contact these people and be able to do that. So what's the intent is to settle within 7 days. The legislation has been drafted to ensure that you have the flexibility to be able to execute, but the mission really is to be able to do this, if required, in the shortest possible time so that we avoid contagion, as I mentioned, sir, in my presentation. And I want to make it clear, sections 18.6 and I think 21.2 speaks clearly to the fact that there shall be no investments or any, so section 18.6, the funds shall not be used to make investments, deposits or placements with member institutions, and 21.2, the corporation shall not invest the fund or part of the fund in a member institution. So to answer your question, it will be counterintuitive to be taking monies to reinvest into an institution where the risk could potentially materialize. So that is completely off the table in relation to the investment of the fund. Typically, the BDIC would invest in government securities and any other asset that we allow them to be able to invest in, but certainly nothing that is being offered within that ecosystem in relation to the members, of obviously for good reason. And so I thank honourable members for their support. This is indeed an opportunity for us to further enfranchise thousands of Barbadians across the land. And I think that as we have seen the progression in not just growth in deposits, but the growth in confidence, that the risk management, if you like, that the Honourable Member referred to in terms of the relationship between institutions and clients, I think that is where we have seen the credit unions take on a much more active role, and long may that continue. But as I indicated, the larger institutions become, you have to make sure then that you have the systems in place to work through those dynamics. Credit default is never a good thing for any, whether it's an institution or the client, and therefore that is part of the reason why communication between those who lend and for those who borrow is absolutely important, because it is the absence of that information and in a sense of that relationship with the institution, however that is defined, that tends to lend, that could complicate matters. And I certainly support the opportunity for credit unions to establish very robust relationship managers, if you like, sir, because there are times when you have to have the flexibility. And certainly COVID, for example, presented a clear example as to why we had to put in place regulatory forbearance, because clearly where the economy had declined because of a significant external shock, then obviously it meant that persons whose incomes suddenly were not what they were before, it meant that both the central bank and the FFC, working together, as it indicated, sir, had to work with the financial institutions of all types to ensure that the necessary, what we describe as regulatory forbearance, meaning you give people time to be able to work through those that tough period and allow them to come out the other side still whole, still intact, without any diminution of their credit quality, simply because of the shock. So the system worked from that perspective, and therefore we hope that once we are able to signal to the rest of the world that we not just capable of managing our fears, but that we have robust risk management protocols that are relevant to our circumstance. I believe that the sector clearly has done that for Barbadians, and they shall continue to do that for Barbadians as we see them participating more in the economy. And so, sir, with those very, very, very few words, I will beg to move, sir, that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Mr. President, I do now beg that you leave the chair and the House and the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Deputy President, permission to take the bill in parts.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 through 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that, Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 through 17.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 17 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 17 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 18 through 28.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 18 through 28 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 18 through 28 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clause 29.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 29 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clause 29 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 30 through 36.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 30 to 36 stand part.
Question is that Part 5, clauses 30 through 36 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 27, 41. I beg your pardon, we'll read that again. Part 6, clauses 37 to 41.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 37 to 41 stand part.
Question is that Part 6, clauses 37 through 41 do now stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 42 to 54.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 42 to 54.
Question is that Part 7, clauses 42 to 54 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move the annual report to His Honour the President to passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Please the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Protection of Depositors Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do no pass and be cited as the Protection of Depositors Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate be suspended for lunch to reconvene at 3:45 p.m.
And we still get an extra 10 minutes.
Mr. President, 2:45 p.m.
The question is that the Honourable Senate be suspended until 2:45 p.m. today. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. With this, the ayes have it. The Senate is suspended until 2:45 p.m. today.